thing. We don't need to be rebellious. We don't need to be rioters or troublemakers or I just don't understand. I mean, man, where could you go to live better than we live in this country? I mean, we got food to eat, clothes to wear, and homes to live in, and the laws of the land protect us.
We're pilgrims. We just passing through.
Right.
I mean, what's the big deal?
Right. That's right. What's the big deal? Why get involved in it, right?
Right.
It's not our country anyway, is it? We're just passing through. That's right. Never thought about it like that. That's a good point. That's a good point. So the king has the power. And so why question the authority? And I put on your paper, note that by wisdom, why question the authority? And let's go over to Acts chapter 4. And all of you know this one. But just to read it. In verse 6. That's not the one I want. No. Anyway, maybe one of you all got the wrong one on here. But when Peter and John were beaten and cast out, and they said we should obey God rather than man. 19. Okay, 4:19. Yeah. I don't know why I put 6 on there. You all can mark that off your paper and put 19 because I messed up there. But Peter and John answered and said unto them, whether it be right in the sight of God to hearken unto you more than unto God, you judge. You know, and now we're back to what Tom said about we're just pilgrims here. We're just passing through. So let's obey God. Let's do that first. So we understand that we don't want, as Christians, we want to be a light to the world, right? And obeying the laws and keeping the commandments of the country, of the laws of the land, then there's not going to be any harm come to you according to those laws. I'm not saying you're not going to get hurt or whatever, but I mean, we need to be careful. And in verse 5, whoso keepeth the commandments shall feel no evil thing or feel no harm. And wise man's heart discerneth both time and judgment. Okay, if everybody's obeying the law and the light turns red, nobody's going to have a wreck, right? And if you run the red light, then there's a possibility you can feel harm, but not necessarily from a wreck, but from the authorities, like we talked about a while ago. So we can obey the laws for our own safety, right? And so as we go through our lives here and face all the complications they are, isn't it easier just to do the right thing? I mean, the way of the transgressor is hard, right? As we have already been taught. So a wise man's heart discerneth both time and judgment. Now, if we go back to chapter 3 of this book, we see there's a time for everything, right? And we can't change it. But a wise man can discern the difference between the good and the bad. And he will discern the judgment. I mean, he's not the final judge, right? But he knows what the final judgment will be, and we can, as Christians, know that we can discern the time of when things happen. Now, there's things going to happen that we're not going to be ready for, not prepared for, but when we're taught and see these things happen and we understand what God is telling us, then we can discern both time and judgment. And now in verse 6, this is a little bit more in depth, because to every purpose there is time and judgment. Therefore the misery of man is great upon him. Now, we don't know when something's going to happen. No wise man can ever figure out when everything's going to happen, right? I mean, we don't know. Right. And we won't have it. I mean, we're just not going to. So, but a wise man will be ready for the unexpected, be ready for the challenge put before him. And I think that's what Revelation 2:10 that we quote so often means. Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life. Even if it means coming down to doing the right thing or dying, what's your choice? And if you discern that judgment, that time in judgment, the time when it's going to happen, whatever's going to happen to you, whatever it is, what is the long-term or the end result of that going to be? That's the judgment I think you're using. You're discerning the time and judgment. Okay, this is happening now, but this is not the end of my life. This is not the end of time. This is not the final judgment. Whatever it might be, we can measure that and we can see that. So, a wise man understands that judgment will come in its time, so don't resort to wickedness or rebellion to end your misery. Okay, things are not going the way I want them to go, right? So I'm going to fight against what I don't like. Well, you're just causing more problems. I mean, you're just adding fuel to the fire. And so this is a misery of man that's trying to figure out when something's going to happen, how it's going to happen. We don't know. And I'm glad we don't. I don't know about you all, but this thing's going to happen. I don't want to know when it's going to happen. I mean, I don't know what's next, but...
There was very few, Brother Brent, of the prophets who were given knowledge of what shall be,
Right.
what they were doing, was prophesying. There's very few of them who are real happy with it. Some knowledge is not comforting.
Right.
You think of the prophets, you think about their state of mind as they were prophesying,
Yeah.
It's not always, it's never good for man to know what's going to happen.
Well, just like Jeremiah, wasn't it? When he was prophesying, they all turned on him. He goes, okay, I'm going to quit. And he goes, no, I can't hold this in. I know, I can't keep this. He was on fire. He said, I can't hold on to this. So, I mean, even though it was a hardship and a difficult time, he had to go ahead. And so when we think about the misery of man, our misery, in generally speaking, is what's next? Are we worried about what's next? Are you worried about tomorrow? Are you worried about next week? This past week has been a very difficult week for me, and I'm not begging for sympathy, but it's clouded my mind to the point of it's hard to think more about what I should be thinking about, because with the sickness of my daughter, and of course we got good news on that, that's great, and the things of others who are sick and other problems that we faced this past week in our families and in our homes, and it's just hard to keep focused. But I think this is exactly what the writer here is telling us. Even though you're going to face these miseries, even though there's going to be hardships and heartaches and heartbreaks, where should our mind be focused and stay most focused on? And so when we talk about discerning time and judgment, there's nobody going to know. There's nobody in this room can tell you what's going to happen at 2 o'clock tomorrow. Maybe nothing, right? So we don't know. And so we need to be ready to face these hardships, because they're coming, because there's a purpose there for time and judgment. There's a time for everything. And this misery is great upon us. And we've all of us among ourselves have talked about things that we don't agree with in this life. I mean, every one of us at one time or another, as I look around the room, I've spoken with everybody about things that's going on that makes life difficult, right? Or something that maybe not long conversations or condemning conversations, but we've all said something about what's next. Man, did you see what happened here or happened there? What are they thinking? And things like that. So we don't know. We don't know. And now, doing all this, let's go over to Romans chapter 13. I hope I got the right one on the paper this time. But thinking about obeying the laws of the land and obeying what we're supposed to be doing, in Romans 13, beginning at verse 1, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. And that's what Brother Tom said a while ago. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works. Now that's what I was talking about. There's no harm going to come to you as long as you're doing the right thing, okay? You're going to be okay. But to the evil wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid. For he beareth not the sword in vain, for he is minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Wherefore ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. And so, in 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 13 through 17, basically are saying the same thing. It's obey the government. I mean, obey the laws of the land. He's talking about living under the sun and comparing the laws to God's word. Which one should you obey? We understand. We obey God first, right? But we're not going to be a problem to our fellow citizens and to rebel against our leaders, and we're not going to be smart enough, wise enough to know, okay, they're going to do this, so I'm going to be ready for it. We don't know. We can't discern that time. We can't discern what's going to happen. And so we need to really, really be grounded in God's word and let that be our guide through all the hardships and heartaches, even with corrupt rulers. In verse 7, for he knoweth not, this is the wise man, which shall be, for who can tell him when it shall be? So the bottom line is, when's something going to happen? And how's it going to happen? Brother Philip was talking about the prophecies. When God spoke directly to the prophet, he said, I'll destroy him. Like he told Samuel to tell Saul, go down there and destroy all of them, everything. And they knew what was coming then. But man, being man, didn't obey and didn't do what they're supposed to do. So why not just do what God says? But, I mean, we don't know how things are going to happen. We don't know when it's going to happen. We're talking here in this world today about a nuclear war, World War III. And I think the media and the politicians are saying things to provoke, and I think we need to remember that there's always been wars, and there's always been an end to the wars. So we need to stay focused on what God is telling us, not on what man is telling us. And I think there's a lot of fear being put into people when, if we're all ready, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. And so we can get caught up in this stuff so easily. And some of the things that people are saying, if you go back to the year 1900 and count all the people that's killed in wars from 1900 to the year 2000, there's been more people killed in that 100 years than the history of the world as far as wars go. I mean, it was just that was a century of war. It was just one war after another. And now the young people, and I'm getting off subject here, I understand, but the young people of today, this is their first war. I mean, we've not really been in wars since the 90s, right? Now, we got people that's 20 years old that's listening to all this rhetoric going on like this is the first time it's ever happened, and it is in their life. But we need to calm their fears. You know, that's what we're here for. And so, you can listen to one newscast and they're blaming everybody, and the next newscast is praising the same people that these people are condemning. I mean, so what is it?
They all got different agendas.
But what is it that we as Christians need to do? We don't need to be a part of either one of them. We need to be a part of the truth. And we've got the truth.
Which is our agenda.
That's our agenda, is the truth. And so that's what we need to be focused on. And just like I said, it's been a difficult week. Judy? Right.
And that helped him through. Paul was up in the third heaven.
Right.
And he saw things and no one could others. That helped him through. And Colossians 3:1 and 2 says, seek those things that are above, not below. And I think if we can't see heaven, but if we stay in the Word, we will see it. I mean, we can visualize what it's going to be like. And that will help us.
I think that's the only way we're going to get through, is through the Word. I mean, if we give in to the ways of the world, then we have no hope of heaven. We have no hope.
Thomas was a doubter because he wanted to feel the wounds in their hand. And Jesus says in John there, you have seen and believed. Blessed are those that have not seen and believed.
Well, that's what.
We're blessed because through the Word we have everything, and that's all we need. That we would just view the heavenly home.
In John 17, where Jesus prayed for those who believe on me through their word, who's he praying for? I mean, there's no need to get caught up in all this. There's really not.
We can see through the eye of faith.
Right. And that part about Apostle Paul going to the third heaven, he said, I knew a man of 14 years ago or had ascended to the third heaven and heard words uttered that's unlawful for man to speak. Now, I don't know what that's like. I really don't. And none of you all do either. But there's one thing that we can know. God's word's true. And if there's a place like that, don't you want to be a part of that?
There was someone there speaking those words.
I mean, can you imagine? I mean, we've got dictionaries that thick with words. I mean, all kinds, and there's words uttered there that's unlawful for man to speak. There's things going on there that we don't even know about. So why would you want to give up? Why would you be concerned? I mean, we're going to discern time and judgment. That's what he's telling us here. Under the sun, these things are going to happen whether you like it or not. Whatever it is, it's going to happen. And when it happens, what are we going to do with it? What are we going to do with it? We don't know when it's going to happen. We don't know how it's going to happen. Verse 8. This is a continuing thought on the misery of man. There is no man that hath power over the Spirit to retain the Spirit, neither hath he power in the day of death, and there is no discharge in that war. Neither shall wickedness deliver those that are given to it. What's he talking about? The way I see this, he's talking about everybody's going to die. And nobody here on this earth has the power to stop death. You don't have control over yours. You don't have control over your neighbors. When it comes time to die, and I'm not proclaiming like a lot of people do. Well, it was his turn. It was his time. I'm saying when death comes, death comes. Right? And what the writer, I think, is telling us here, that we can't stop, we have no control over the time when we die.
We physically go back to the dust, but where's the spirit go?
Back to God who gave it.
Exactly. He's the only one who can retain the spirit.
Right.
We got no power to bring ourselves back.
And we can't say, oh, I'm not going to die right now.
No, can't do that either.
We just can't. And somebody's sick in your family, or somebody you really love, somebody you care a lot about, well, I'm not going to let them die. I'm going to stop that. Now, you might put the fire out if the house is on fire, but when somebody dies, you can't stop it. And I think that's the message here. We got to be ready. So when the day of death, we don't have no power. And there's no discharge in this war. We're not going to get out of this battle. We're not going to get out of this battle. I heard a guy speaking the other day on this very thing, on verse 8. And he was talking about a physical war, and you in a physical army, that if you're in a war, you can't get out of that war, because the army won't discharge you until the war's over. Now, I don't know where he got that out of this verse, but I think this is a verse simply saying you're in a war and you're facing death. I mean, whoever he's talking to, all the people he's talking to, everybody under the sun, right? He's talking to, you're in a war and you're going to lose, you're going to die, and there ain't a thing you can do about it. And you can't get discharged out of this war because you're going to die. I mean, it's just that simple.
Paul spoke about the flesh warring against the spirit and things like that. That's basically the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's a battle.
Yeah, it's constant.
It's a battle.
Even when we're asleep, we dream.
Yeah, and another thing that we do, when we get sick, we try to get well, right? We take medicines, we do things to stay well. I mean, we wear the mask. We used to wear everybody used to wear them. And now there's things we do to hopefully don't get sick and die. But ultimately, we're going to die.
We're commanded not to tempt the Lord our God.
Right. But, I mean, there's nobody, no matter how wicked they are, how good they are going to win this fight. You're going to win. And you can't get out of the battle. You ain't going to get discharged from this. And so, in Matthew 10:28, what was it Jesus said? Don't fear him who can don't fear the one who can destroy the body, but fear the one who can destroy body and soul in hell. So why be afraid? Why be afraid? I mean, it's a good thing to fear God, because we know what his powers are and his wrath he has. All this have I seen and applied my heart unto every work that is done under the sun. There is a time wherein one man ruleth over another to his own hurt. There are wicked rulers, and sometimes those who are ruling in a manner that they're doing more harm to themselves than the ones they're ruling over. Yeah, Caesar. And just like Ahab and Naboth, wasn't it? Is that right, Naboth, who had the vineyard, and Ahab killed him to get his vineyard? But what happened to Ahab? I mean, he didn't die righteous, So, I mean, we don't know. We just don't know. And so we can't stop death, but we can prepare for it. We can see that some rule in a manner that is detrimental to themselves and maybe others too, the way they rule. But again, we discern time and judgment. Okay? And so I saw the wicked buried, who had come and gone from the place of the holy, and they were forgotten in the city where they had so done. This is also vanity. These corrupt rulers, these wicked rulers, they're going to die too. And they're going to be forgotten, just like everybody else. It's hard to understand as we face life that we'll never be remembered. You know? I mean, in a sense, and you go, well, my kids will remember, my grandkids will remember. What about the next generation? Or the next generation? Who is alive here in Olive Hill in 1869? I mean, who's remembered? Who's forgotten? So it's not important to have the preeminence or to be popular or famous. What's important is doing what God says. Living under the sun. Even if the wicked rulers are in charge, even the wicked ruler is not going to get out of this. All right? So, why do some continue in the evil? Verses 11 and 12. Because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily. Therefore, the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. Though a sinner do evil 100 times and his days be prolonged, yet surely I know that it shall be well with them that fear God, which fear before him. So, why does the wicked keep on performing wicked things? They're not punished. In my lifetime, I have seen punishments for small crimes, and some of them severe punishments. I have seen in my lifetime a person arrested for shoplifting would go to jail for a month, or pay a big fine. And now, in our land, there are laws that the police can't even arrest anybody unless they steal at least $1,000. So these people are walking in stores and carrying stuff out and don't pay for it. That's not that way in Kentucky, but in some states it is. And, I mean, why do they keep doing it? No consequences. But there's a consequence to being evil, but it's not executed speedily. It's not like Nadab and Abihu or Ananias and Sapphira. When we read about those, it was executed speedily. But for the most part, it's not. Evil is not punished very quickly anymore. And, of course, God, he's got one judgment coming. He's going to settle it all, right? He's going to fix it. And so when we read this, the heart of the sons of men is fully set to do evil. And I think about the Amalekites that were told, if you go all the way back to Genesis, when God told Abram, before he was even Abraham, he said, I'm going to take you and show you the land I'm going to give you. Well, Abraham, or Abram, if you want to call him that, he never went, but his descendants did, right? But he told Abram, he said, you can't have that land now. Their sins are not full. That's a scary verse. Their sins are not full. Well, what happened when their sins were full? Land spewed them out. God gave it to the Israelites, and the Israelites took it. And everybody that got in their way got wiped out. Is that a pretty good lesson for us today? When the number gets so small, you think God will execute judgment? Let's quit right there at verse 11. And anybody have any comments or questions or anything? We'll pick up right there next week. Good Lord's will. Appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you. I better turn this off.